Hello, and welcome to Supply Chain Next. I'm your host, Richard Donaldson. Join me as we explore the ongoing evolution of supply chain, from the challenges practitioners face every day to the ongoing digital transformation of the entire value network. Welcome to the next episode of Supply Chain Next, and I am super excited actually to have Bob Eckel on here. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Good to meet you, Richard. Glad to be here.
Good to meet you.
Let's have some fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm super interested and we want to get right into it with, you're bringing a really interesting perspective on biometrics, right? And how biometrics, we live in a world today where everyone's security conscious. Biometrics can be found in pretty much all facets of our life. And as more and more data is being compiled about ourselves, our health. I mean, think of COVID, and everything else that we're releasing out there as far as digital data, having that secured in a way that is unique to everybody, aka biometrics, is a huge place to be right now. So very interested to see, and your background. So just right in there, let's start right in. Bob, would love to hear a little bit about your background and journey and how you got to where you are today.
All right, that's a great starting point. So, it has been a long journey, but I think it's been a good one. I didn't begin with a focus on identity and biometrics. When I was growing up, I took that for granted. People did steal stuff, but at that time we just used paper for driver's licenses and those type of things. At that time. So I started my career in Southern California. I graduated from the University of Connecticut, and I wanted to work for an innovation leader. And I also wanted to live someplace warmer. All right. So I grew up in Connecticut, played baseball there and did all that stuff. And I just said, you know what? Hughes Aircraft Company, started by Howard Hughes. I'm going to start there. They gave me an offer. I flew out. Once I hit the California sun, I said, I got to do this. And so I was out there for 10 years, worked for Hughes in various imaging capacities, went to UCLA, got my master's. And then as the family was growing, we said, all right, let's get back to the East Coast a little bit so we can see the relatives and do all the stuff with the kids. So we moved back to the Boston area in Raytheon. And lo and behold, a few years later, I was working at Raytheon. Raytheon, as a lot of companies did at the end of the 90s, bought a bunch of companies. So they bought Hughes. So I'm working with people I worked with, 10 years earlier, and they bought Texas Instruments and Allied Signal and all that type of stuff. And basically, Raytheon's a great company, good government company, good, and they had all these assets now. And they said, Bob, can you put these assets together and run an air traffic control business and assemble that with our new acquisitions? And being technical, I said, sure, let's do it. And so a lot of the stuff right now, when I left Raytheon, I left where we installed all the radars and the software and every other type of thing. But the thing that came up, and I really didn't think about identity management much, but I went through 9/11 at Raytheon. So I'm at Raytheon, and all of a sudden, there's no planes in the sky, and we're talking to the FAA because I was there every week. And I'm thinking, how can a couple pieces of plastic take the whole country down? Where they forged driver's licenses and things like that. So it got me thinking. And then a few years later, I got an offer to go work at Digimarc and run their identity part of the company. And my focus became getting biometrics introduced into the driver's license system so that there weren't multiples. And when you had it, it was basically one person, one identity. When you got that, it was, when they went through it, it was a tough, long transition, but I think most of the states are now using biometrics when you enroll and when you re-enroll. And it's just one of those important things that that's how I started. And, and it wasn't planned. And then I just became like, one person can't take down the country again.
Yeah, no, exactly. And picking up on that. And I think this is also, I don't want to overlook the fact as well. Somewhere along the way, you also have received 25 patents. That's not your typical
Yeah.
That's not typical. So maybe you could just take a moment and where did that all fit into that sort of journey? And also don't want to overlook the fact to go from building the current air traffic system that runs essentially North America. That's not not a trivial thing either. That must have been an amazing experience just to be involved at that level and see that system still in place today, like without a lot of changes, I would say. So sort of two questions in there. Your patent portfolio, if you could talk a little bit about that, and then I want to kind of revisit maybe in reverse order here. And not kind of blow past the fact that you were responsible for deploying what is our air traffic system today that runs North America, and how that feels, even knowing that's still in place today as you fly around. Does it make you scared?
Actually, I actually feel good about it because like I said, just kind of finishing up on air traffic control, we did it throughout the world. Right, the end was really did air traffic control around the world. And every time I flew, I'm always thinking, I'm glad I was part of it. We were involved with the augmentation of the GPS system and as well as the radar systems and all of the software behind it. And I keep going back to the word systems. So most of my patents are in systems or connecting systems that you wouldn't necessarily think would go together, like optics with electronics or various things. And it's all around trying to make people's lives better or solve a problem or make things frictionless or simpler. So I, developed one of my patents was around how do you shrink down? You see those huge zoom lenses on sides of football fields and stuff. How do you get that so that you can get a huge wide field of view and a narrow field of view close up at the same time? And it's very difficult because you're going from different type of optics, but with the advancement of electronics and huge imaging devices, you can do a flip and you could adjust the focus and you can adjust the f-stops and all that stuff in a blink of an eye now. And because of the resolutions in early days, if you did something like that, you'd go from maybe 1,000 pixel to 1. But then once you get these things that are, 10,000 square pixels, huge camera systems, to jump it down to 1,000 to 1,000 and do the same. It's just one example of things that solving it so that they didn't weigh 300 pounds anymore, they weighed 10 pounds, or just bringing things into everybody's daily life is what. So that's why the air traffic control systems, and then getting into biometrics, it's a system where Aware's working on the future where you can own your own identity. A system where you provide your identity and only the parts that you want to provide. You don't, when you go to buy alcohol, they don't need to know where you live. They just need to know you're of age. Mm-hmm. So, put the control back in with the people. And those are the things that since 2005, I've been working on solving with the team in biometrics and all different biometrics, iris and finger and face and voice and everything else to make it convenient.
So that's a super interesting segue into exactly kind of the heart, I think, of where biometrics or just security, if I were to broaden this, a little bit wider, widen the aperture a little bit, which is what we're really talking about: security around, personal stuff. I mean, that's where most people think of it. And the topic couldn't be any more timely right now with everyone's, people have identity stolen online, right? So you've had this rise of all these kind of identity management systems, and some have worked, some haven't. And we're still trying to find that kind of, silver bullet. We've tried fingerprints and retinas, and, it's not that we can't necessarily measure or use those things, but we haven't found a way to actually incorporate that in everyday use, as you talk about it, right? And a lot of your career is about finding ways to bring things to everyday use. This is no exception, I would imagine, for you. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that, like where you view the state of the world today in this journey towards securing individual, I'll call it, I don't want to say liberty, but individual data, right? Privacy, right? I mean, that's really at the core of this.
Yeah. And so that's why I keep going back to, I believe that every individual should own their identity. And so it's a big difference of what Aware does. I mean, we're in the business of providing technology and software and things for people and to use. And it's in the systems where I call it opt-in, where you opt in as an individual, not in a surveillance type thing. So you opt in as an individual for a benefit, or to get through a line quicker, or to make a payment processing, or any of those type of things. So I tie those together in that it's just very important that we don't get into a big brother type of thing. And so we're not into that. What we're into is making it so that you can take and use your biometrics, or opt in to use your biometrics to make a quicker, secure transaction. Mm-hmm. So I think, given my background, and you talked about the patents and the way I look at things, we've been going about it backwards. Mm-hmm. We should look at what we're trying to solve and see how biometrics can make your life better and easier. And that's mm-hmm. one of our slogans, is bringing biometrics to life. And so rather than saying, leading with your chin and saying, here's biometrics for you to do this, people are going, we don't even know what you're talking about. You're talking about my blood pressure. You're talking about what are you talking about? But solving a financial transaction. So let's say you've got a couple $100 transaction you want to make. The banks or financial institutions or even shared economy could set levels of acceptance of what amount of biometrics are needed. You don't need, to move $200, you don't need your face, finger, iris, firstborn kids, mm-hmm. And then others, you might want to add modalities to it, like, mm-hmm. voice and speaker recognition and so forth, to make a bigger transaction. But let the individuals kind of, work with that to do it and set some of those parameters.
Mm-hmm. So, and this is now focused on, amazing description is there, but we're focused also on people, which is the obvious, main pain point, right? People are concerned about personal identity theft, mm-hmm. security of their own personal health data, like you said, privacy, right? Right. I'm going to stretch a little bit and say, okay, but now what about in the world of assets, right? Kind of, we're starting to go into sort of supply chain, because security isn't just relegated to personal individual human beings. Security and identity can also go to individual assets. And I'm thinking even now, and maybe this is one that you've also thought about, but like all the rage right now, especially in the sort of blockchain world, are these NFTs or non-fungible tokens. And mm-hmm. Is that just another hype kind of thing? I mean, where do you see the world of security and identity management in, more asset related kind of fields?
Well, you just take an asset. So if you look at an individual, and that's very important, and why wouldn't an asset, depending on what it is, also fall into that category as just as important? So, one example I like to use, or don't like to use, however you do it, is making sure, like our nation's power grids, right? Isn't that a supply chain that's supplying mm-hmm. power? Okay. Yep. So to me, that's an important asset that you want to protect. So you can almost say the national power supply is an asset or an identity into itself. So that needs to be protected. So imagine if somebody was able to get access to it, control it, change it, and you didn't have that. I think biometrics could protect that. And how would it protect it? You wouldn't have access to be able to shut down the power grid like the storm did in Texas a few months ago with devastations, right? So imagine if using biometrics to solve a problem which needs to be highly secure, only a certain amount of people can have access to change or to alter or, switch power from one grid to another. You could do that with all four modalities of biometrics using yourself. Let's say you had access to it, or you in conjunction with another individual to get access to it. Mm-hmm. And no one would know or have to know your identity. And you just went to tokens and, all the cryptography and everything else. All the system would have to know is that you, as this token or identity or template, is authorized to make these changes. And the business rules, along with 3 other people, had to also do the same thing. So, so now you get into it, you're protecting the individual's identity. You're protecting the supply chain. You're protecting the power grid. And the only time you'd ever have to know that you, Richard went in to do anything is if you want to do it forensics or if you want to look at it for process improvement, to say, wow, Richard went in and he did these things. And all of a sudden we got a huge process or huge improvement in our power because he changed something. Otherwise, you have a protected supply chain now, and you have anonymity of the people that did it because they're in this group that you've given that group access or multiple access and stuff. So you've protected the supply chain and you protected you as an individual. So I think it ties extremely well.
Right. And so building on that and seeing that, and because there's a lot of the world in supply chain, there's a lot of innovation going on right now. But again, in the same sense, there's an equivalent amount, if not even more so, in the world of security. Right. And so if we do the Venn diagram, we're starting to see this intersection that's starting to happen. Right. Do you see that as something that's happening now, or we're just at the early stages of that sort of convergence of those two kind of Venn diagrams?
Well, one thing I see, and it's starting to take off again, because at Aware we do a lot of, we work with a lot of financial institutions, and we work with a lot of government agencies for border and access and all that type of stuff. We're seeing an acceptance from the individuals and people commercially. We're doing millions of financial transactions or enabling financial institutions to do millions of financial transactions just using biometrics, not having to touch anything, being able to enroll remotely, securely, especially this helped huge amounts in the COVID time, so no one had to actually go in. So for instance, take an example. Our technology allows you to enroll remotely. We know if you got a mask on or trying to fake it, and we also know if it's a video and all those things. And so we can do your face and voice, and that could be used later at your discretion to create and move financial transactions around. And then you could set different business rules that in order to move over 1,000, you got to have your face and your speaker recognition, or vice versa. And the same, again, depending on the supply chain that you're protecting, which is very important for, we'll talk a little bit about U.S. and why I think it's important for us to, have our own supply chain in these areas, especially in software. You can protect that same entity the same way.
Yeah. And so now thinking in those terms and kind of moving a little bit more into the sort of full supply chain aspect of it, are you seeing, even from your vantage point, a lot of what you do today is focused on individual security. Do you have any thoughts or insights into where the supply chain world is starting to incorporate biometrics, or any, example sort of use cases that are out there? And I'm just thinking, like, off the top of my head, I'm thinking like, IBM and Maersk tried to do sort of a blockchain-esque thing for chain of custody, and it had to do with sort of securing the data around stuff that's in transit, right? Now that's blockchain technology, data integrity, but the use case also had some security aspects to it. So it's not exactly the same thing, but I'm thinking now, I think you and I spoke about this, the delivery of biopharmaceuticals, right? So how do I guarantee that this dose of COVID vaccination is the dose that I expected to get, right? There's security aspects around that. So where are you seeing the use cases of securing that in a, either a human biometric means, i.e. Bob or Richard have the authorization to make the changes, or assigning that unique ID to the asset or thing itself, the actual vaccine itself, or the batch? I don't know how, I'll just ask you that to expand on that.
Yeah, so that's a great example. Turning it around a little bit, we see it's being adopted to prescribe. So let's say at different, so I'll just do levels again. So you go to the doctor and they want to prescribe something for a rash. So they can go through a normal process and do it. But then let's say you need something more controlled substance than that. So now it's required that they need to make sure that it's the actual doctor prescribing it, not an assistant or not someone else, or they hand their phone or hand a computer or anything else. So now you add the facial recognition or the fingerprint. And let's say it's OxyContin or something else. So now you want to make sure it's really, and you do a speaker recognition and that. And what ends up happening in that whole thing, you just created a chain. Everything is now tagged with that. And so forensic, let's say later you could actually set up something in supply chain that looks at the patterns and says, wait a minute, what's going on here? Without even knowing the doctor's name, you just say, why is so much being pumped out of, with this particular ID or template, like you just said? Why is there so many of the same IDs prescribing this all over the country? Right. And then you could actually, if you wanted to, get into forensics and find out the ID and do all that type of stuff. So it's directly applicable to that, like, on the vaccinations you said, or the vaccines, right? It's got an ID associated with it. Well, that ID could actually be associated with a trusted individual, so you can have the ID would actually have a biometrics part to it, so that when it was coded, it would go back and be tracked back to where it came from and who actually put it on the truck, and when, or the doctor that authorized it. So it those are the type of things relative to even tying into blockchain or any of those. It's just a piece of the blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a piece of data in the blockchain.
It's a piece of data in the blockchain, and so I'm starting to see it, and I believe we've got an agreement with a company that is getting involved in some of the healthcare type stuff, and that can be extended to all records. So we do B2B. We're a B2B company, but they service the customers. So in those cases, they're going to be looking at housing or getting authorization from you, just like we're on this video. How do you know I didn't pre-record this video and I'm just doing it? Well, with biometrics and the techniques that are out there now, which didn't exist before, we could tell if this is real or a video.
So that's okay. So now you're opening the door to, this is an interesting one, because now you're doing these deep fakes, I think is also what you're kind of referring to, right? Where I've got, there's enough horsepower in my CGI or computer graphics today, if we just look at the movies that we watch, that we can generate, images of you and me digitally that most people cannot differentiate from. So you're suggesting that biometrics are a way to prevent that copycatting going into the future. I hadn't even thought of that. That's a really interesting use case.
True. And we just got a certification compliance at the highest level of that, fraud detection or and obviously the more money you have, the more sophisticated you can get on some of the graphics. The good news is, as it gets out there, I said we're doing millions and millions of transactions now. We have access to edge cases and other type of things where we can continue to improve and improve. So as I go, it's, if I was to say it's perfect and you're never going to have anything, no. But it's about data, statistics and supply chain, right? You got the learning curve, you build a few of them, you learn, it goes down the learning curve, and you could be able to sell at a much lower price once you figure out all the stuff. Same with biometrics. The more and more cases you do, within 3 months, not even 3 months, we were able to adapt to be able to do facial recognition with people with masks on without having to re-enroll them. Wow. So that they could, it's just amazing. And now you have to do a lot of samples, again, to go through it. And as you go, it's a learning system. So again, as things came up, our company was able to adopt, do it, get it into the field, because what was happening is it was being used in a retail setting. People come in and want to buy something. They'd look and it wasn't recognized, and they'd have to pull the mask down. So guess what happened? They didn't go to that store anymore. They didn't want to do that any longer. Then we send out a new bill. They were able to go in and make the transactions.
Yeah, and you also touched on something there too, which I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into. So now And I think great overview where biometrics can be played, both individual supply chain assets. I mean, it has use cases all over the place for securing everything we do digitally, right? Because the world is moving into a digital twin of everything. So there's going to be a lot of fraud, as there already is, and biometrics are a way in which to create unique fingerprints, for lack of a better term, across all things. So where I'm going though is now one of the fears, right or wrong, that people are going to have is, okay, how do you protect the data itself? So you have the ability to get my iris or my fingerprint or whatever it is you're using as unique ID, right? It could be even the, like you said, the facial construction. I mean, I've heard now everyone has a unique earlobe, right, that they use. There's characteristics of ears that people can actually track and see instead of facial recognition. I mean, the patterns are almost, again, we're snowflakes. And I don't mean that in the millennial term. I mean that in the unique term, right? So where I'm going is, can you talk a little bit about the natural fear people have, which is, okay, that's great and all, but then who's protecting the data itself that you've collected to be able to do all this stuff? How does that get anonymized? How does that stay secure? How do I know that when I put my fingerprint in, that's something that someone can go corrupt and get access to later?
Okay, so you got a couple questions there, but one of them is the collection of the fingerprint or the biometrics itself. Okay, so at that point, I'd say, just in the way we do it, we're agnostic to how you do that. So we can use mobile data, you can do whatever. That's a very vulnerable part until it gets encoded, encrypted, and decoupled with you. Right? And so, and that's why a lot, especially in the U.S. and things are going more distributed. So you own your phone, you have your phone, so it's on there. But the way we're looking at it is actually, once you do that, there's no need to keep your actual biometrics any longer. Why do we keep that? It's all ones and zeros and binary and templates and stuff. So if it doesn't get stored anywhere else, it doesn't get sent to a big cloud in the sky, it actually becomes now an encrypted, I hate to use the word token because it is and it isn't, on your phone. That's all that exists. And there's no association with anything. And it's your access pass to get in. And you decide whether that has enough, I'll say, fidelity to get into certain events or to do certain actions. So your biometrics, as I see it going in the future, won't be floating around every place. It's not that it goes and gets stored someplace and then you're comparing that to there, like it is today in some of the areas. So it's just that initial, wherever that initial part is done, is the vulnerable part. So if you have to take your picture and you have to send it to the cloud and encrypt and do it, it's in that period of time or doing it is the most vulnerable part. So it depends on the system. Depends on the sophistication of the system.
Totally. And part of this was a leading question because I'm headed towards, is this a use case for something like a blockchain use case, right? Because the entire purpose of a blockchain database is to do the things, and this isn't, I'm not pitching blockchain use here, but you got me thinking about this, and I just happen to be fairly involved in some of that. And it seems like what you're describing is, I need, as a product person, putting my product hat on, I need a database that is secure, distributed, non-hackable, and anonymizes the data in a way that I have, anonymity around what's in there, right? And to me, that feels like a blockchain use case that hasn't been explored, or maybe it has. That's why I'm kind of asking the question. Do you see that? I mean, that's centralization versus democratization, like you just kind of went through. But I'm wondering if you've seen any of that.
And it's just about, since we provide biometrics and the capability throughout the world, different areas do it differently. So some is more centralized databases, but again, they pretty much throw out the images or the raw data, so that they're not storing that. So even if you were to get it, it's not associated with it. It's just a bunch of ones and zeros. So if somebody got in and it depends on, again, how it's stored. just a bunch of ones and zeros fall on the floor. So they could do techniques where it's just completely scrambled in there, but it means nothing unless you're going to go to use it. There's no associated. You can't reconstruct it and make it look like you again. It's not associated with your, some of your demographics and the like. And that's both, and that's why right now I think there's depending on whether it's a greenfield type country, whether you go central, and there's advantages of both. Central allows you to do a lot of civil activity, right? You can do a ton of stuff if you go central. Now you get that. And if you go distributed, like a lot of the U.S. and a lot of others want to or have, where you control it, now you got to have somebody that kind of aggregates that up across a whole bunch of those type of things. So it's definitely available. It's usable, and there's going to be somebody that's always going to try to crack it.
Let me. Right. I mean, that's sort of just the name. As long as there's a place where there's a bank, there's going to be a robber trying to rob it. That's just sort of human nature. I don't know if that goes away anytime soon. But now, also, because we do get sort of a panoply of listeners here, I start to think about, use cases like in now our daily lives, because again, I'm going to go back to kind of the consumer side of this. I mean, you're the business enabling this, but you also, as in the function that you have with Aware and the platform and just your experience, you're also in this middle place. You get to see the people and how they're actually developing these biometric databases, if you will, and data capturing. But then you also see the use cases of it actually being used in the real world, whether it's consumer or business or enterprise or whatever, right? So where I'm headed is you have, everything is becoming digitized, right? I mean, for goodness sakes, our cars are driving themselves.
Correct. No, that's a perfect example too. I mean, that it would fit right into the cars, right? So
exactly.
You go to pick up a car. Exactly. So you get there, and just a simple use case, right? So if you become part of that car club, let's say you're going to go rent a car, and so you gave that up, so you could show up, actually go pick up the car, and you could run it, because now you got a connectivity to your, let's say it's a distributed network, and you've already done that, and they vetted simply. Now you get your phone. So you got your phone, you got the car, it connects, you look at your phone, it connects, you go, you show up at the gate, Bluetooth hits it, comes back. Are you still the person in the car? Those type of things, or you can use the outside video, all of that stuff connects. So that gets the whole car rental experience, or that whole thing of preventing it. And everything in the consumer world is about convenience, and frictionless. So if I'm doing something today, and I've seen a few things fail. So I'll give you an example of a supply chain integration process failure, right? You go to rent a car, and there's, let's make up an example. There's 30 cars a month that are stolen at a particular airport. If you interpret it one way, you'd think that they want to get it to zero. Right? So you set up this thing, so now it takes you a half hour to rent your car. So guess what happened to that particular example? Those people went to another car rental company.
Right.
Versus all they wanted to do is knock it down 10, 15%, see some immediate return. And all the good people, or the ones that were already would go through quicker and faster. So now if you were part of the club and you opted in, this is why I said you opt in, and you trust that you can control that, now you can go and rent your car and be out in 5 minutes. And if you didn't opt in, it might take you the half hour. Instead of the opposite way, where everybody took a half hour, 40 minutes, because they didn't trust anyone. So with biometrics, you can turn the world into a more trusted environment, because most of the people aren't trying to scam the system. And so now you can speed things up, make it convenient, and also knock down some of the fraud. Again, it's not going to be perfect. They'll figure ways around it. But, trying to get 30 cars a month stolen down to zero lost too much money for that company, because now everybody was being inconvenienced. They didn't trust anyone they went through. So with biometrics, you add that trust back in.
So
whole trust factor into the supply chain.
And it makes all the sense in the world. And I mean, for whatever reason, and it's sort of random, but you start, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Westworld, you start making me think about kind of the digitization of everybody.
Right, yeah.
And we got our sort of, digital replicas of ourselves, stored in some place. But where I did want to go, though, is the flip side of this, right? Which is, and again, there's a little bit of the fear factor, right? Which is, on the one hand, I do want to secure everything. I do want to have the ability to be uniquely identified when I enter the system, wherever that entrance may be, through my car, through my house, into an airport, into a venue for a concert, whatever. But the flip side of that is, if I can guarantee that Bob Eckel or Richard Donaldson is the unique person doing this thing, that means I can also track them. Right? There's the corollary to this, right? So if I'm on Google Maps and I enable Google to watch where I'm going, Google knows where I'm going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So have you given any thought to the other side of this which is, and it may not be, but I'm just thinking in general for most people, right? Which is, the flip side, which is, okay, yeah, I'm going to give you, I do want to secure everything, but I know if I'm securing everything, there's an ability to see all that I'm doing.
Okay, but see, that's where you have a choice. So you then, instead of, it's just like whenever you open up an app, it says, do you accept this? Right? So in that case, you don't accept it for that. So this is what I mean, going back to, at the beginning, I said, you want to go in and buy alcohol. They don't need to know where you live. So right now you have to show them a driver's license. So if they are sitting back there and they're nefarious, they can look at where you live and follow you later. With this, all they got is your face. And that's it. And of your face and an age, because you're in there and you're showing your face, right? And your face is on the license. So both are free. But you also not allowing them to use it for anything else other than that transaction at that time. So basically that, to your example, it kind of goes poof. It disappears. It's time out. So you go in, just put it in terms of the fourth dimension, right? So you go in, you buy the alcohol, you've only allocated 30 minutes for that. And then it's immutable and it disappears. It's revoked. It doesn't exist in their system anymore, the token or whatever. It doesn't connect anymore. So you're adding the old, like RSA or other technology to that. You add a time element to it. So that it can't continue to be active when you're not there, and you didn't allow it to do anything more than purchase alcohol in those 30 minutes.
Right.
So and that's why I keep going back. At some point in the future, over the next 5 to 10 years, an individual is going to want to control that. Right now, you see what happens. You put your face there, and people can. That's why I asked you at the beginning of the video. People can go in and scrape it and do other type of things with it. But in this case, where you're doing transactions, you're not really using your face or your voice or anything. You're using something that expires, or if you look at the old Mission Impossible, it kind of goes in smoke. Just goes away. It redistributes into the ones and zeros, and that's controllable.
Ethan Hunt, you can accept this mission or not accept this mission, and this message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no. Well, because you open up the door to also where I want to spend a little bit of time is looking forward, and you're looking out there now 5 or 10 years, and certainly as an industry leader, captain of a company that's moving in that direction. But 10 years from now, kind of putting on your vision hat, where do you see biometrics in society? I mean, I think you sort of touched on it, but I think you're actually. I'd love to hear you expand on where you actually see that playing out, because I think I agree with you that the movement is to put the power back in the individual users, but that's a long ways away still from happening. Yeah. Right. It's not here today. It sounds great, but I think it's a 10-year kind of project at least.
I agree with you. I agree. Yeah. That's the time frame, and I think in that time frame, we're going to be in what I hope would be a passwordless world, one where it's just even getting on and going through the multi-factor authentication or the stuff that's back and forth. Look at I don't know. easily people get a subscription to something, and 300 or 400 other people have the same subscription to it because they just give you a ring and then you send them the text code or what. So I'm looking at passwordless both from a business perspective, and from an individual perspective, that companies will shift to adopt that. They'll be able to say, you took out the subscription and you're allowed 3 identities. Okay. You, your wife, and one of your kids, or you're willing to pay for 10 identities. And it doesn't matter where you are, you can access that or do those type of things versus today. It could be, it's the number of identities is unlimited, because it's not really tied to an identity. It's just tied to a closing of a loop of numbers back and forth. So I just see it going into a passwordless, both on the company side and payment side and individual side, and an individual being able to protect themselves by, if they aren't there in physical, or they didn't authorize it through their device, which contains their information, they're protected. And I just see it going that way.
And let me absolutely, and now let me kind of double click on that, because there's going to be a pull and there's going to be a push and a pull, a tug of war here, where I'll be a bit controversial here, but governments, and I mean that in a general sense, are going to want to have access to this data. But then us as individuals are probably going to want a non-government entity to sort of be the clearinghouse for this, right? To create some separation, right?
Right. So
10 years from now, in your head, where do you see this kind of drifting? Because that's an interesting place to start thinking about. What is the future Google of personal identification? Does that company exist? Is it out there? Will it come about? And how does it then how does it fend off the obvious desire of government to have access to that information as well too? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I would just separate it into layers and levels. Right. The base level is, are you old enough to buy alcohol? Okay. Right. Doesn't need to know. And if that's at that level, somebody could aggregate that up, right, and enable that network to happen. Right. That's like a basic level. Now, when the government's going to have certain things, but now you're not opting into that network if you don't want to.
Right.
You still have a choice to not opt into that network. So if you opt into that network, I could see you get a discount in that particular. Let's say you belong to one of the big supermarket or warehouse grocery places. You're already signed into them as a club. You're part of that club. You've opted into that club, and those clubs could be the holder of it. It's kind of a distributed. So you get 2 or 3 big clubs. We don't need to name who they are. They could decide, if they come to you, you could use the other 2 clubs if you like, and we'll give you a discount. Your choice. And all they need to know is, financial transactions, and you could set up that you have to be present in order to do it, or so you could. I see it being they're going to have to ask you, and then you're going to be able to decide. I only want to use it when I'm present. So if somebody tries to use this when I'm not in your store, it doesn't count. So these are the type of things that you give the person to control, but then also the company can also ask you if you're willing to aggregate these or not. And we started at the beginning with the government, so it's not meant to be set up as a big surveillance network, and all those type of things. And that's the thing that people worry about. And I would worry about it too. It's you're controlling it. When you go up on Facebook or all these things, your face is out there. People can use that.
Yeah, totally.
But when you go to make some of the, we've enabled a lot of financial institutions and others to use your face to make a transaction. But we're not using your face to actually make the transaction. It's an authentication of it. So your face isn't leaving anymore. It can be done on a device because it's been, I'll say, compressed. So one of the Aware's background, it was started with digital compression. So you have something so your face could be set up, and we just got another compliance of encrypted, highly secure, fingerprint encrypted type of systems were hard to crack and compressed.
Mm-hmm.
So originally compression came out of there's not enough bandwidth. Now it's coming out of being able to not reconstruct it but authorize it. So it's a different type of a use. Yeah.
Well, I with you 100%, and good answer. I was actually going a bit further out, which is I was trying to imagine in my head, which I have. This is just my own character flaw here. I start to think out a little bit too far sometimes. But I was actually just thinking now today, someone's born and they're assigned a social security number, right?
Okay. Yeah.
However, what we're talking about now is you're born with all these unique identifiers, and you're almost registering those identifiers at birth, right? Because that becomes your keys to the kingdom, if you will, right? As you kind of enter the world. And so it sets up a really interesting sort of, I don't want to call it dilemma discussion around, well, okay, if that's the way the world goes, and that's a part of the kind of, the parents, here's the unique identifier because you got your, your retinas, your blood, whatever unique identifier you want. I mean, that's bestowed upon you at birth, right? There's just, you're just registering that. But then who do you register it with, and how is that secured?
Yeah. So now you're getting into something that's required or something that you opt in or not opt in at that point. Right. And so that's an interesting world that I haven't really thought about, one where you have
that's a little too science fiction.
And that's why I keep going back to having a choice. You opt into the condition. So if everybody was forced to opt in when they're born, that is not a free society. I mean, that's to me, now you get into, and so we're all about being able to opt in, be part of that club, get the benefits that you want, or not get in. So today, you see, when you go into a lot of these, like you said, the big video type and all the other stuff, you're pretty much signed that you've opted in to use their services. And if you read the fine print, they aren't responsible for if other people use it or get a hold of it, right? The difference is when you opt into a service with biometrics, those are just pictures. When you opt into a service in biometrics, you should look at, is the biometric, is it being stored in an encrypted manner? How's it being stored? Who gets to use it? And those things is the key thing, and so that's going to be a personal preference. I want it to be a personal preference to go forward.
Totally. Yep, with you 100%. Let me also just be a little conscious of time. We've got plenty of time, but just a few minutes left. And I want to kind of sort of wind up a little bit with just a kind of now we were sort of out there decades, but now pull back a little bit into the next sort of say 12 months, 18 months. Coming out of COVID, things are kind of getting there. I mean, what's going to go on in the world? What do you see over the next 12 to 18 months in the world of kind of biometrics? Because now another aspect of COVID is we have ultimately, or human beings have ultimately taken more steps into the digital world in the last 12 to 15 months than they did for the last 10 years, right? Like everyone has been forced to do Zoom meetings. Yeah, right? So the world's more digital than it ever has been. And if anything, it's accelerating even faster now with all the things that are going on. So this type of biometric security is a incredibly timely thing. I mean, it always has been, but even more so now. So how do you see it playing over the next 12 months?
Well, I see touchless access, building access, or remote, being able to securely and feel good about enrolling remote and creating and performing a transaction remote. And that's what we focus on. So being able to do that remotely, or we have our building set up now. If you come up to our building, your phone gets pinged and you get to look at it. And if it's you, doors open. Okay, so completely touchless. I see a lot of things going, it'll also help, if you go to the hospital, visit somebody, right? You go to visit somebody, you got to go and you got to sign in, you got to touch all this stuff. I mean, I go and to assisted living to visit my mother-in-law, right? Go to there. I had to go through screens and do it every week, all the time, versus comes in, recognizes me, and then it says, "Who do you want to see, Bob?" And I say, "Oh, I want to see Cheryl." And then it recognizes me as Bob, and it goes, "Okay, she's in room 303. Go ahead." It's completely touchless. I can see all of that, the visitor management thing, all of that type of stuff is going to gain traction, just because it can. You don't have to have fancy anything. You can have the iPods out there. You can have the Androids out there. You can have the edge devices out there to do this. And then with the access controls that are all digital now, you can have full control. And you can always have somebody that's looking at it if there's an anomaly, depending. But as a company or as a building owner or any of that, you could set the business rules. And we have a platform that's pre-configured for these, like enrolling people in HR, or pre-configured to do visitor access, and you control the business rules, whether you want face, finger, iris, what do you want? How do you want it? Oh, this is fine. We just face is good, except if you go into this area, we want two things. So we put together a platform, called BioSP that does that. It's pre-configured, but then a company can reconfigure it, change the order of things, add data, to it if they want, documents, compare it to a driver's license, compare it to a passport. All that exists. And I just see it being more readily adopted because of the need to remove the touching, of that. And I just see that's where it's going. And I just see it's everything. It's just exploding that way.
You know what? And I think it's a great way to kind of wind things up. But that's a great point, right? Whether, again, doesn't matter how you view what's happened over the last 12 to 24 months.
Right.
An outcome is a world where touchless is actually now something people are really thinking about, right? I mean, forget the biometrics for a second, but the need for, I just don't want to, intermingle stuff. And that's okay.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that, but it's going to drive a hell of a lot of change, just like you're suggesting, and biometrics might be at the forefront of that.
And think about it, if, it could just be and I know some of the big amusement parks and others are looking at this, but when was the last time you had a cold, Richard?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Literally? It's been a couple of years.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. So going touchless, I mean, just think about it as you go through here. It really, I thought about it. It really changes things, and it can be done. It's not like, with Bluetooth and all this other stuff, it's not like you have to rip everything out and start over. With the edge devices and being able to enroll remotely and do all that stuff, you put the control, the connectivity is there right now to be able to do this.
Yep. Totally with you. Yeah. Well, on that note, Bob, I just want to thank you. This has been an incredible episode. Really had a lot of fun having a conversation like this. Would love to check back in the future here, but really thank you for the time today. It was really just amazing.
No, it was good. I didn't, like I said, didn't know what to expect, but it was good to talk about how you believe, and I think I do, that a critical supply chain is an identity that needs to be protected at the same type of level as a person's identity. And that to me is extremely important, and it could be done. So I appreciate your time, and this was good. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Bob.
This is Richard Donaldson. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments about the episode or topics in supply chain you'd like us to explore, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at supplychainnext@requis.com. And while you're at it, why not check out the Requis platform at supplychain.requis.com. Requis allows you to manage the full asset lifecycle in the cloud, collaborating with your entire value network to buy, manage, and sell your assets. Find out more at www.requis.com.